Which one's after?
Hello, folks. Thanks for coming. If you're here, this is the Pathfinder AP seminar. Feel free to grab a seat. If someone wants to hit those doors, that would be excellent. We're running a little behind. I can wait. How many of you here were here for the last panel? Okay, a couple of you. Well, then you heard the big news that we've announced our next AP. But we'll talk about that in a little bit.
Once we're approved to actually speak.
Yeah, that's right. So why don't we just go around and introduce ourselves?
Once we're approved to speak.
She already did. Yeah, they did.
All right, we're good.
Yeah.
All right, then, in that case. I'm Ron Lundeen. I'm an Adventure Path developer for the Pathfinder Adventure Paths.
Patrick Creaney, same job description.
I'm Adam Daigle. I'm the managing developer, but whenever I was just a plain old developer, I was working on the Adventure Paths.
Yeah. And so
I'm just legacy here. That's really the
we had to rep the old school, right? Yeah. So you can point all your Rise of Runelords questions toward Adam.
I've got my James Jacobs puppet.
Right. Yeah. Well, thanks for joining us. We're just going to be chatting about Adventure Path stuff and what we're excited about, what's coming up. I think Ron's probably a good person to kick us off with some Extinction Curse details, maybe?
Sure. We announced at PaizoCon let me back up one step and say Age of Ashes, the first volume of Age of Ashes is available downstairs now. It kicks off the very first second edition Adventure Path. Mm-hmm. Starting with Age of Ashes and through Extinction Curse and onward. The plan is to have all the Adventure Paths go from first level to 20th level. And Extinction Curse, the second Adventure Path, is no exception. We announced it at PaizoCon. It's the one where the characters are all part of a traveling circus. In the very first adventure, the ringmaster has been found murdered, and the heroes are the only ones to be able to take on the role of leading the circus, and then lead it around the Isle of Kortos. Some of the key driver there is some very, very angry Zolgaths, which is what we're calling troglodytes under the new edition. We've done this for a lot of our monsters. We've evaluated what it is people call them versus what they call themselves, and we've quit calling for what we used to call the Dark Folk, or now the Caligni. They don't call themselves Dark Folk; they call themselves Caligni. Same with Zolgaths. That's the name that they've used for themselves for a long time. Same stinky lizard monsters. But they're very angry and trying to stop a Zolgath, trying to wipe the Isle of Kortos and everything on it, including the city of Absalom, free of life, is what you're trying to stop as you're traveling around the magical towers. We got some of the art in for the first of the Extinction Curse.
Sweet.
About the PCs in a circus.
I haven't seen that one yet.
Yeah, the iconics for that are going to be Linny and Fumbus, who's there, Amiri, who you might expect, bending bars, strong woman, and then Harsk, the ranger. We have 6 adventures that are there. Let me run down for the 6 of these. The first one is called The Show Must Go On by Jason Tondro. Takes you from level 1 to level 4. Legacy of the Lost God by Jenny Jerzabski is levels 5 through 8. A lot of that involves some of the legacy of Eridan that he left behind on the Isle of Kortos. And then Life's Long Shadows by Greg Vaughn. It's a lot of that's travel around the breadbasket of the Isle of Kortos. And a lot of the little towns that are there. It's a real traveling part of the traveling circus. Does the most in-adventure traveling there. Things go wrong in one town in the 4th adventure called Siege of the Dinosaurs by Kate Baker. Requiring the heroes to go quite a ways deep underground to find out exactly what is going on. Lord of the Black Sands by Miko Kallio. And then ending, again on the Isle of Kortos, with The Apocalypse Prophet by Liz Liddell, which take all the way 18th through 20th level of that last one. That is sort of the whole arc of Extinction Curse, stopping the Extinction Curse, and if the PCs do so and make sure that the life on the Isle of Kortos remains, then they can play.
They can play the next AP.
I want to interrupt real quick.
One
of the things that we've referred to Absalom as the city at the center of the world for a long time, and in our print products, we've done very little Org Play has played in Absalom quite a bit, but one of the things that we're doing with establishing, looking around the Isle of Kortos, and then you center into something that is more dealing with the city, is what Patrick's about.
What I'm about to talk about is called Agents of Edgewatch. Is the AP coming up after Extinction Curse, whereas Extinction Curse takes you around the Isle of Kortos, kind of takes you around the hotspots around Absalom, which is the city at the center of the world. Agents of Edgewatch takes you into the city itself, where you play as members of Absalom's Guard, the newly established Edgewatch, which is overseeing the Precipice District during a basically a World's Fair. We call it the World's Fair, but and your guards during that time. So so the 6 adventures for that, which were just announced, are the first one will be Devil at the Dreaming Palace, which takes you kind of your rookie cops new on the scene. There's missing people. What's going on? Oh, I don't know. We better look into it. And then that unfolds into a larger criminal plot, obviously, which leads you into the second volume, which is called 60 Feet Under. And then that takes you around the Ascension Court kind of area, where there's all the temples to all the gods that have ascended via the Starstone Cathedral. And third volume is called All or Nothing. That takes you to the Docks District, where you're doing some interesting heist work. You're kind of running a sting operation as members of the City Watch. The fourth volume is called, and Ron, you told me this would happen, that I'd forget them. I was like, I got them all on the top of my head.
You forgot the...
Oh, no, I didn't. No, I didn't.
You forgot the one
I'm
writing?
I was just teasing. Yeah. Well,
He was just throwing it to you.
That's right. No. The
chance.
fourth one is written by the very talented Ron Lundeen. It's called Assault on Precinct, or not Precinct. No, that's right. Assault on Hunting Lodge 7. Can you guess where the title maybe borrowed its inspiration from? And the fifth one is called Belly of the Black Whale. That will be written by Cole Kronwitter, one of our PFS authors, who is has ascended to AP writing. The sixth one will be written by another person who hasn't written an AP before, Amber Stewart, who wrote Book of the Damned 3. The sixth one is called Runes of the Radiant Siege. And I didn't name the first 3 authors. The first author is James L. Sutter. The second author is Michael Sayer, and the third author is Jason Healy. Thank you. Yeah. So anyway, it will be the first AP where you, where you're in Absalom, first AP where you're playing members of the City Guard. It's kind of a fun twist on the usual formula. One of the first scenes is there's some rabble-rousing adventurers, some rookie first level, a wizard, an elven wizard, some dwarven fighter. They're making a mess in the tavern, and where usually you'd be the those rabble-rousers, you're the cops that got called in, and you have to solve that peacefully. So it's kind of a fun twist on a familiar formula, and we're looking forward to seeing how it goes.
It's also all urban, and you never leave
the
city,
yeah,
correct?
Never leave the city. That's right. All Absalom all day. So yeah, you get to, one of the main objectives is to be able to go and see the different districts. Absalom is composed of like 9 or so different districts. Don't quote me on that number, but and you start in the newly revived Precipice District, which was destroyed in an earthquake about 15 years ago, and it's just been a real bad scene for the past 15 years. Undead walking around, all that stuff, and so it seems like the perfect place to host a World's Fair. So you get to do crowd control. Help.
Urban renewal. That's
right.
Okay.
That's right. Yeah, it's urban renewal, and then so you're managing the day-to-day little crimes that go on, but quickly unfolds into a much larger plot. Spare the details.
Both of these adventure paths together are really counterpoints to each other, intentionally so, because in Extinction Curse you'll go all over the Isle of Kortos, but zero of the action takes place in the city of Absalom. In fact, all the way throughout, one of the things that your characters are aspiring to do is to be good enough to perform in the city of Absalom for the big crowds that are there. But you want to go there in Extinction Curse, but you don't ever leave it in Agents of Edgewatch. In Extinction Curse, without painting circus people with a single brush, let's just say that leaning towards chaotic is totally fine. Whereas
Agents of Edgewatch, obviously, you would hope that the law would be a little awful, at least. So maybe, yeah, it could be compared a little bit to like Skull and Shackles. That was hard to play a paladin in a pirate adventure, whereas this one might be a little bit harder to play an anti-paladin, I guess. You know, so yeah, it's interesting that way to play with these sorts of paradigms and assembling a group of PCs that all have a common ethos. So yeah. So most of this panel, we were hoping to shoot to the audience, but we could wax all day poetic about the APs. But I'm sure you'd love to ask your questions. If you would like to do so, please step up to the mic.
One of the things I do want to warn everyone here and our Twitch viewers that since we're talking about a whole bunch of different APs, there's going to be spoilers. So sorry.
Already
Sorry, not sorry.
Spoilers. All right.
How's it going? Great. Mm-hmm. Sorry.
How we're?
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. Could you rephrase it?
Certainly. The second edition conversion required that you make decisions on here's how past adventure paths have resolved. Knowing that you're going to have to make that kind of decision in the future, is that coloring any of your design decisions for the current adventure paths that you're working on?
I don't think so.
Well, I think we always kind of knew in the back of our heads that we would, you know, in every adventure path, something happens. The world is about to end in 6 months, you know, so you better tune in and save it. And I think we always knew that we would incorporate those into a greater story. For instance, with Shattered Star, that kind of took place right after Rise of the Rune Lords. So, you know, we played with that idea at that point. That was 5 years ago or so. So we've played with the idea that there will be long-lasting repercussions based on these adventure paths, and how do we want to resolve that? You know, who wins? Do the bad guys win? So going forward, yes, I think we are definitely thinking about that in terms of, you know, what resolution do we want from each of these, and how's that gonna affect the future of. It won't. I think we'll stick with the same formula of assuming, you know, that the world won't change every 6 months. You know what I mean? So it'll be
the heroes win, but what the effects of that victory could be some unintended or unexpected consequences.
Mm-hmm.
Or different varying degrees of winning.
Right.
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
Right.
Hey.
Yeah, this is another question that has to do with the ways that adventure paths end. In a lot of the older adventure paths, this kind of stopped with War for the Crown, I believe. You had a section at the end called What If The PCs Lose? I was wondering, why is it that that was not included in either Tyrant's Grip, War for the Crown, or Return of the Rune Lords? And most of all, I was wondering, what do you envision happening if Tar-Baphom actually wins in Tyrant's Grasp and does make it to the Starstone Cathedral?
Man, that's a good question. I sure hope he doesn't.
That would make our APs a lot of trouble.
It would make it, yeah, both of the adventure paths we're doing sort of rough if he's cracked open the Starstone Cathedral and gained the power of a god. We didn't. The reason that we didn't do specifically, I can speak to Tyrant's Grasp. The reason we didn't have a concluding the campaign for, actually, I think I can speak to Return of the Rune Lords as well. That's the one. That one goes all the way to level 20. And so providing additional adventure content for your characters and the continuing of the campaign articles that provides the additional content is where the What If the PCs Lose section appears. We didn't have an article of that type when you go all the way to level 20. We don't anticipate an article of that type in second edition because they'll be going all the way to level 20. With Tyrant's Grasp, instead of that article, we devoted absolutely as many pages as we could to letting our developers, many developers as wanted it, to have their sort of last first edition say. So the whole last 28 pages of that is all the developer showcase, where each of us got a page, usually 2 pages, in order to do something that knowing we would never get another chance in first edition to show off. The What If the PCs Lose and Tar-Baphom cracks everything open and becomes a god isn't something that we put in for that reason. If you're asking me myself, then it's probably you're running a very different type of campaign than any of the stuff that we're going to be set up to run for in second edition. There's not, I guess, plenty of places you can go for that if you want to have sort of a substantially darker and grittier tone in your gaming at all going forward.
It kind of turns the whole world into Ustalav if a lich becomes a god. Yeah. So
Okay.
yeah, so space reasons really. Yeah.
This next they're asking about for more for the crown. What happens then?
We did have a what happens afterward, and the way that we structured that what happens afterward is what type of ruler does Eutropia become, and some of those built on what type of ruler she would become if the PCs were just bloodthirsty murderers all the way through, or totally failed to complete several of the objectives. So the what happens then is whichever of those 3 results is the bad one, and I don't remember off the top of that, but that's functionally the continuing the campaign, or what if the PCs lose, is if the ruler that they've been spending the whole campaign setting up is a really bad one.
Okay. This next question is from Twitch. Rogue Galaxy wants to know, how do you scale an adventure path for small groups, like 1 or 2 players? Maybe a buddy cop in Edgewater?
Oh yeah, I would love that. Yes. You struck my heart. Yeah. I would say, you know, I mean, the easy answer is half the monsters. That's not a very satisfying answer. You know, one of my favorite groups from back home I ran with just 2 of my buddies, and what that offers you as opposed to a group of like 4 or 5 players is a lot more intimate setting, a lot more role playing, right? You get to know the character, you get to know there's only 2 characters really, so 2 main characters, so you get to know them a lot better, like a buddy cop movie. So I would say, you know, I think for Agents of Edgewatch, that'd be a great way to plot it out. You know, you wouldn't go full Die Hard, right? Because that's like one cop, but yeah, you know, you could do a Lethal Weapon thing, you could do a Rush Hour thing, I don't know, yeah, all sorts of stuff. I would look, I could talk about movies all day, but you know, so that was a big inspiration for a lot. Yeah, and I do, yeah, yeah.
So really, I don't think that question is adventure path specific. It's for any adventure, and this is more like GM advice than adventure path.
Yeah,
conversation. It's different depending. How you adjust that for half the anticipated players is dependent on a particular encounter, what the class makeup is. There's a dozen factors.
One way that it does factor into adventure paths, the way that I've run adventure path, the last several adventure paths I've run, is we have the points at which the advancement track, which is the points at which you are expected to level up. I ignore those, and I simply level up my players based on sort of my experience with the game when I think they will best meet the challenges as written. And if that means for a smaller group they are higher level than the actual adventure path says, or for a large group or a particularly powerful or very skilled broken group, that they are substantially lower level than the adventure anticipates. And I just adjust that sort of.
That's a good tip. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you could basically make them higher level if it's a smaller group and have the encounters the same.
With these new adventure paths, it seems that, and especially with the new rule systems, that you're kind of limiting more the scope to a smaller area, or to a smaller, you know, outcome. You know, you're not going to hell to, you know, stop some guy from instilling himself in the land, or something along those lines. Do you feel that the reason, or do you agree with that assessment? And secondly, was that a conscious choice that you would want to kind of scale it back a little bit and then expand as your 2nd edition books start coming out?
Well, with Age of Ashes, the outcome of that is a very world-impacting one. Spoilers again. But if Dayhawk gets out, then that's not good news for the entire material plane, right? So I would disagree to a certain extent. It does, you know, I can see what you're saying, though, in terms of the Isle of Kortos being obliterated of life. It doesn't affect the rest of the world. I mean, it does, because the biggest city in the Inner Sea was destroyed, so trade is shattered. You know, all sorts of stuff happens, I'm sure, as a repercussion. But I think it wasn't, speaking for myself, it wasn't an entirely conscious decision. It just seems that you have every 6 months, like I was saying earlier, every 6 months the world's about to end. That's kind of a trick that doesn't, I don't know, lend itself to going every 6 months, right?
Right. I think it's the ending serves the stories that we want to tell. And if the stories that we want to tell are ones that have a more zeroed in scope, then the ending is going to seem less world impacting. And if the stories that we're telling, Age of Ashes being a fine example, Tyrant's Grasp being a fine example, right? They could have much broader, more dramatic conclusions.
So some stories we want big endings. Some stories, you know, it's cool to make it narrow.
All stories are big endings for the heroes.
That's right.
Right.
That's right.
That's the important stuff we're building in.
Yep.
The Starfinder Adventure Paths experimented with 3-issue story arcs. Is that something you guys are also going to try, or are you happy with the 6 issues?
There's no current plans, but it's not off the table.
That was fast. Next question comes from Twitch. TRDG11 wants to know if there'll be any mini games in either of these upcoming APs for the party to get into. I'm thinking maybe they're talking about subsystems, perhaps?
Probably, yeah. Well, I mean, if you're part of a traveling circus, I mean, this is a good point to talk about, like, our roles, I guess, yeah.
That's true, actually. We'll let, I'll let Patrick go into more detail,
Sure.
but one of the things that we do, that we've done with a lot of the adventure paths, we have a developer who is primarily focused on the adventure development and any of the back matter sort of monsters or articles that are significantly load-bearing for the adventure itself. If you looked at a lot of our past adventure paths, it'll take place in or around a specific town, and then we'll have like a 6-page gazetteer of that town. The developer who develops the adventure almost certainly develops that gazetteer as well, because everything going on in the town matters a lot in the adventure. But if we have another article about the role of Rakshasas in Galarian, right, that would be developed by the one of us that's taking sort of the back matter role. And we've been switching on this one. So
Yeah.
for Extinction Curse, I'm the adventure development lead, and Patrick is the back matter development lead. And then for Agents of Edgewatch, it's the other way around.
The reason we do that is because, like, while you're developing the adventure, I'm outlining the next one. And while I'm developing my adventure, you'll be outlining that. And that's a little bit less onerous. It takes less time. So you have time to do the back matter. I don't have time to do the back matter because it's just works out time-wise.
Right.
And it's impossible for a developer to develop a 96-page.
Yep, in a month. Yep, that is impossible.
I mean, we could if months were 45 days long.
That's-
I
yeah,
think we could
yeah.
actually do it.
Okay,
Yeah,
that's
okay.
good. Do
So
it.
we've been
So-
space and time.
So will
But-
there be subsystems? Yeah.
Yes. So specifically running a circus is a subsystem that I worked, that Patrick sort of built from the ground up, about how to run a traveling circus, what it means to take the actions to prepare for it, to advertise it.
Yeah, because you're adventuring all the time. But that's really your second job, honestly. You're circus performers first and foremost. So you should, I mean, one definitely has a more impact on the world than the other. But you want to be able to do a circus performance, and if your player is like, well, I jumped through rings of fire, then we want to make that, how does that affect the crowd? What kinds of dice should you roll to determine if you're going to be a successful performance? And that also has an impact on like how you're perceived in the areas where you're adventuring. So it does have an impact on the adventure itself. But yeah, that would be the subsystem for Extinction Curse.
Yeah, probably worth pointing out that we actually had several in-depth conversations with our design team as well to make sure that the subsystem we were creating not just hung together by itself, but hung together with the rest of the second edition rules in an intelligent, cohesive way.
Yeah, absolutely. And for Agents of Edgewatch, developing a subsystem is very onerous. So I think in general we're probably going to take a break from that for one AP. So
yeah, I think we're unlikely to keep adding subsystems in every adventure path. That just takes, especially now that we want to get more feedback from design on that, make sure it's as completely baked in with the rules as we can. There's only so many designers; we can only pull on their time so much. So we're gonna.
Yeah.
So Extinction Curse has one. Agents of Edgewatch, not so much.
That said, there are little things in each volume. Of course, there's victory point systems or like little mini games. Of course, that stays the same. Each volume has its own thing. Yeah.
That's what I'm sort of curious about. If you could add a 7th volume to any adventure path, either as a like end qual or like a midway point between two adventures, which adventure path would you give this 7th volume to?
Ooh, fun. Yeah, that's a good question.
That is. Ooh, I've got an answer.
Go for it.
Council of Thieves, because that was the first adventure path of first edition, and we hadn't quite figured out exactly how much XP you needed to get to, so you only got up to like 13th or 14th level.
Wow.
And by adding extra volume to that, you'd get into higher levels, and it'd be a lot more satisfying, I think. That's my answer.
I'm going to say Hell's Vengeance. I think it's awesome that at the end of that one you have crushed the leader of the Glorious Reclamation. But not only are there more members of the Glorious Reclamation to be crushed, Yomade hasn't come down one way or the other on that. Maybe Yomade comes down in favor of what the Glorious Reclamation has been doing. Decides she's got to take maybe a more personal hand in these upstart followers of Throne, and you could put a pretty dramatic anti-Yomade 7th volume in at the end of Hell's Vengeance.
I don't have an answer.
The next question comes from Twitch. Davik the Grey 33 asks if there are any plans for an Alkenstar or a Mana Wastes adventure path. Please.
Wait,
Yeah,
hold
yeah.
on. Okay, calm down.
As we have the author of Wardens of the
Reborn Forge. You got it. Wow, what a mouthful.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
Good job, Patrick.
Well, speaking of movies, let me tell you about my favorite movie, Mad Max Fury Road. And I would love to make a Fury Road adventure path. I would love to do that.
Yeah, we have all of us have several ideas sort of burbling around in the backs of our heads, and some closer to being announced than others, but all of us sort of with it churning in the back. And I'm happy to let Alkenstar Mana Waste churn here.
Sure. Well, the trick with that, right, is that we want to. One thing we're thinking about is how can we latch these products onto each other, so if we were to do an Alkenstar Mana Waste thing, we would need the rules for firearms and emerging technology in second edition, which we don't currently have. So in what book would we release those rules, and at what date would we do that? And we'd want to build the AP into that date. How else could we tie it? Another thing we're experimenting with is like having 2 APs in the same region of the world. So yours takes place in the Isle of Kortos, mine takes place in Absalom, very close. Where else would we go around the Mana Waste? Would it be a Nex or Geb kind of AP? These are things we think about, and it takes a while to come up with these. It's a long-reaching thing. We're looking at the future, and we're determining, where's the game at? What rules do we want to incorporate? Is this the right time? Do we want to wait till we have other rules in place? Have we already touched on that region recently in another product? There's a lot that goes into it, and like I said earlier, I would love to do a Fury Road AP.
One of the other things that goes into it is some of the stories that we want to tell tied to this region would fit better in one of our Pathfinder adventures than in an adventure path. Right. And so maybe that's there's a lot of different ways we can visit some of these places we're interested in visiting.
Yeah.
Kind of tied into that, we've had a number of adventure paths that are like return to Sandpoint, return to Sandpoint. Long-term second edition plan, is it a few more of those return to, or explore more of the new places we haven't ever had an adventure path in?
I think some of that's still being determined. A lot of the reasons that we have been to Varisia so much is because that's the baby of the creative director. So as someone who gets to make that call, sometimes that call gets made. I know that a lot of the rest of us have our own little interest in our own little places we want to play in the world, and we just gotta pitch to convince the powers that be where we can go.
Varisia is a good example because it was the first AP, right? Rise of the Ruin Lords. You start in Sandpoint, and so it's when you mention Pathfinder.
That was even before we had a world.
Yeah, right. We described Varisia in volume 2 or 3, and that we didn't have the rest of the map at that point. So that's one reason we keep going back there, is because it's kind of like our home base. It's what a lot of people think of if they saw Path. If they joined us when we started Pathfinder, they're like, oh yeah, it all started in Sandpoint. So that's one reason we keep going to Sandpoint, I think. Have we been to other places a couple times?
Cheliax.
Hell's
Vengeance, Hell's Rebels, Hell's Vengeance. Kind of had a lot to say about Cheliax. We can't say Council of Thieves. We can't say we wouldn't go back to Cheliax. But we've told a lot of stories there.
Yeah.
One of the things I'm interested in personally is trying to do more with around the edges of the map, places we haven't been to, things we haven't seen yet. Just off the edges of the map in a way we've gone. Ruins of Aslan did that in that direction, westerly.
Yeah.
But there's a lot in our world to see and do, and a lot of it sparks our interest sort of in individual ways. So.
Yeah, totally.
This next question is from Twitch. Severin Laureate asks, how much paperwork are we going to have to do in Edgewatch?
Oh,
So much paperwork.
plenty, all of it. That's the best part. Don't you love that part of the movie when they file the damage reports and stuff? No, not too much paperwork. It'll be mostly action.
For a more serious question, also from Twitch, Stefan Radermacher asks, will the backgrounds in Extinction Curse be circus roles like strongman or clown, etc., etc.?
Clown is one of the backgrounds I wrote for Extinction Curse, actually. If you want to have your, yes. It turns out that in the core rulebook, you open the core rulebook right now, one of the backgrounds you can pick for your character is Acrobat, which gives you circus lore as its lore skill. Oh, I'm leaning into that. There are going to be plenty of different options to get circus lore. One of the things that I love to do for this was to go into the background of actual circuses and their performances. So one of the backgrounds I put together, I don't know, it hasn't been through development yet, but somebody who is, for example, a butcher, not somebody who carves meats, but in old circus parlance, the butcher is somebody who goes up and down the stands trying to peddle cheap toys and bad food to get people to buy. Part of the background for for all of the characters together is that there is a circus, spoilers, there is a circus that is run by somebody who is not at all good, that the player characters left for very good reason. And so the background they have is, what did you do in this other circus versus what do you want to do now that you're sort of on your own and creating your own new thing. So yeah, tons of circus stuff. Clown is one of them.
This is sort of a question in regards to how you're going to be like redistributing like content from adventure paths. Will they be regularly reprinted in like a larger texts, as in the case was with the bestiaries in Pathfinder 1, or are they primarily going to be their own thing? Are adventure paths going to contain a lot of class options regularly, and what are the odds of like given say like archetypes printed in a AP being reprinted in later books?
This is a great question, actually, because one of our main goals with Second Edition Adventure Paths is to tailor the rules content that we supply for players to make it so that if you play the Age of Ashes Adventure Path or the Extinction Curse or Agents of Edgewatch, you end up with archetypes, feats, spells, magic items that are super tied into that AP. And by 20th level, a fighter, Joe fighter, Jane fighter, 20th level fighter by the end of Agents of Edgewatch will look completely different than Jane fighter from Age of Ashes. So, whereas in Age of Ashes, they'll have all the dragon slaying feats and all sorts of, swords made out of dragon hide and whatever. At the end of the Edgewatch AP, they'll have, all sort of an archetype based on non-lethal, takedowns and sort of that kind of stuff. So we're definitely building the rules content in each volume with that in mind. How can we tell our story better? How can we immerse the players and the PCs into this setting and this setting specifically? We're not trying to do generic rules content in each AP, because that doesn't cement you into the story. We're trying to make it so when you play this story, your character looks like they played this story.
One of the things that lets us do this very effectively is the second edition concept of rarity, that every rules item is either commonly available to everybody, you don't even need to ask your GM, uncommon, meaning you have to have some way of getting access to it, or rare, which is the sort of things that's easiest for the GM to sort of box away. Virtually all of the content we're putting into the backs of the adventure paths that's player focusing is in that uncommon range, and it's sort of things like, here's a bunch of new spells that your players can get. If you meet so-and-so, she'll teach you the uncommon spells here. That's how you get access on the uncommon access, is by things you do in the adventure path. And that allows us to put a lot of player content in there, and it puts it in a way that's sort of controlled. The first volume of Tyrant's Grasp had a bunch of player-facing rules, which was fine. It was a good place to put them, but it didn't ever answer the question about how do the players even get this stuff? How would a player ever even see this stuff that's at the back of an adventure path? What we're doing with the adventure toolbox in the back of each of the adventure paths is saying, here's thematic stuff, often usually tied to something that goes on. This is how this is how you get it to your players.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things I really love about Second Edition now is that any character can take any archetype, right? There's not class archetype. There's not, swashbuckler archetype for rogues or whatever. There's the swashbuckler archetype, or for example, whereas, or like for Agents of Edgewatch, it would be like a non-lethal, police officer archetype. Anyone could take that, and it would say, like Ron's saying, if you meet so and so NPC, Lieutenant so and so, they will teach you the ways of this archetype, So what's really, what I like about that is that rather than having to make 12 different archetypes to hit every class, you can put one archetype out there and then a couple people can take that. And that's another benefit of having the retraining rules hard baked into the rules from the beginning, is it's, I'm 10th level. I don't really want to take this archetype would have been great if I had 10 levels ago. Well, it's like, well, you can just retrain and, rebuild it a little bit, and then there you go, you got it.
And then you're in it.
Yep.
I think I also want to speak to one of the things that you had, the question about reprinting, because in the past we had taken like Psychopomps first appeared in an adventure path and then graduated into a hardcover, and because in first edition all of our hardcovers were very setting neutral, and so a lot of times when stuff would come from an AP into a hardcover product, a lot of that flavor would be stripped. With second edition, we've got an entire chapter talking about Galarian and the setting, so that setting and lore is all baked in to the rules as is. And another thing in adventure paths that we had to do is, if we wanted to reprint anything that wasn't from a hardcover book, we would have to, or include anything from a hardcover book, we'd have to reprint the entire feat or the entire spell or whatever. Now we're not going to have that. We can freely pick from whichever books. If it's a Pathfinder Second Edition book, we can just reference it. We can just do what we need to do. So I don't think we'll still probably collect monsters for bestiaries, but maybe not with as much frequency as we did in the past.
Well, and the monsters go the Starfinder direction now, right? In that it used to be that the monsters in the back of adventure paths took up 2 pages, and if they graduated to a bestiary, that kind of got mushed down to 1 page. But many of the monsters we have in the back, not all, but many of the monsters we have in the back of adventure paths now are on 1 page. And so can easily graduate, either stay as a 1-page monster or easily graduate to a 2-page monster if they get picked up for a bestiary later on.
And allows us to put more monsters in the back, which is always fun.
More monsters,
monsters.
I know the Paizo staff has a lot of penchants for Easter eggs. Are there any ties between the Circus and Extinction Curse and the ones that we encountered in the old modules, Murder's Mark and the Heroine?
Oh, is there...
You certainly had those on your desk when you were writing the outline.
Yes. Having some of those themes, one of the things I look for is whether or not having some of the characters or the themes fit well for Extinction Curse. And so some of the places with the characters and themes I did. One of the themes that didn't fit well in Extinction Curse, well, I was given the opportunity to write for Agents of Edgewatch and kind of snuck some of them in that way. So yeah, they'll show up actually throughout any place they seem appropriate. The ones that are most appropriate, sort of a circus themed, yeah, you'll see some of some of the themes definitely, and occasionally some of the people, but they'll show up wherever they fit. The old modules, yeah, I was looking through all the old modules. Frankly, that wasn't the extent of my research. There are a lot of old Dungeon Magazine modules that took place in circuses that were kind of fun and things like that. I did a lot of, not just historical, I did a lot of research. I was thinking back. Not only was I doing my research for his vintage circuses, but also how vintage circuses have been portrayed in not just our role-playing game, but other role-playing games. So that's been part of the fun of doing that research.
This sort of ties into something that I saw in Return of the Rune Lords, and something that was actually discussed at a panel like this last year, and that is the idea of outsiders having been old enough to see previous civilizations and have picked up their advanced tech even though they've long fallen. Return of the Rune Lords Part 6 has a boss fight against a Vrock who fought in ancient Thassalon, but is wielding a firearm that's more advanced than anything on Galarion. What is the whole story behind how much are outsiders able to freely pick up tech from a world that's have risen and fallen in terms of highly advanced machinery and bring it to a low-tech world?
I don't know that specific thing, but generally extraplanar creatures can just gate into pretty much anywhere on the material plane, and different places in the material plane have.
Kind of remind me of like Rick and Morty a little bit, when Rick will just like, blast in and he'll come back with a serum from the future. It's like, yeah, that's what they do every day, and they're 5,000 years old or whatever. Yeah, that's
Being immortal's pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's one of the benefits of being an outsider. Yeah.
I mean, as I think the answer is as the story demands.
Right.
I mean, that's probably the best way to put it. If
Yeah.
we needed something like that to be a plot point for one of the stories we were trying to tell, yes. Otherwise, I think it's probably safest to say the outsiders live and know what the heroes live and know, just because that's going to make them more useful as interacting with the heroes, rather than stepping in to solve their problems or stepping to bring some strange technology that doesn't apply, isn't helpful to the story.
It probably won't happen too often, honestly, because then it becomes a gimmick, right? Like if at the 6th issue of every AP an outsider came in with a space gun, you'd come to expect that. So it really is whatever best suits the story, like Ron's saying. Yeah. Any other questions? What time is it? That's what I call audience participation. Thank you. We'll chat some more. Oh wait, we got 10 minutes left. That's usually when we break down, right?
Well, I mean, if we were responsible in like that last panel, then we would end at an appropriate time to be.
And it doesn't seem like there's any other questions. So.
Yeah. So this is Okay, let's do it. One last question.
Obligatory question about adventure paths. Like, do you plan on covering Galt, Jalmaray, or Tianja anytime soon?
Nadal.
I don't feel like Galt, the story that needs to be told for Galt, is long enough for 6 volumes.
It's so hard. I mean, it's just like a revolution every day. Yeah, how do you even talk about that? Yeah.
Jalmaray.
Jalmaray's great. Yeah. I mean, that's where the Ruby Phoenix tournament is. That there? I can't remember. I don't remember.
Jalmaray seems an important consideration if we're telling any story in Nex or Geb, right? Because that's how anything in Nex or Geb sort of gets transmitted to a lot of the rest of the world. I mean, so it seems like that. So it's not that I'm being evasive. What I'm saying is as those come up as need to tell the story, right? Or would be sort of a natural outgrowth of the story that we're trying to tell. Then they would come up. We do have a Jalmaray themed adventure path that's we're going to announce right after Agents of Edgewatch. Well, I mean, no, and we wouldn't say if we were or Night Owl. We wouldn't say until that time came. And on one aspect, that's being coy, but the more realistic one is that we want to make sure that the stories we're ready to tell and announce are ones that are sort of fully baked that people are really going to enjoy. And sometimes that requires thinking all the way through a story and deciding it's not that story's time, or that we could do it better if we waited or something like that. So
that's one of the things that's always entertained me, following the every time we'll announce an AP, people will start speculating about what's the one after that, or a wish list of where they want it. And it's almost never a story of this is the one where the PCs X, Y, or Z. It's always, I just name a country.
Yeah.
And it's that's setting. That's not a story.
Totally. So with Agents of Edgewatch, it's this is the one where the PCs are cops. That's a great thing. This is the one where the PCs are in the circus. I think where it is almost. I mean,
it does flavor the narrative. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it's not the driving part of the narrative.
Yeah. So I think going forward, we're gonna try and do that a little bit more. It's think of the theme. What do we want to evoke? What emotions? What movies? That kind of stuff. Yeah. What do we want to play off of?
Yeah. Here's the maybe the other way to think about this really resonated with me is if you're stuck in an elevator, somebody here at Gen Con who knows gaming but doesn't know Pathfinder at all, and you only have 2 sentences to tell them the adventure path, are you going to hook them? Right. If the way you're planning to hook them is, well, we're doing this. Reigniting the war against Geb and Nex, to use the example I just had, and the nation of Jalmaray, which is sort of our quasi-India, is in the middle there. You're just going to get a puzzled look.
Your grandma says, "What are those?" Yeah.
But we want to be able to say, this is the one about pirates. This is the one where you close the gate that's pouring demons into the world. This is the one where
set in a zombie city, whatever. Yeah. So yeah. All right. Well, thanks for coming, everyone.
Yeah.
Really
Thanks,
appreciate it.
Everybody.
Ready?